Well, I think that this has been floated for some time by the president. Him labeling it currency manipulation. And what the Chinese did actually gives some credence to it. You'll recall that the U.S. and the trade negotiators during the USMCA, our trade negotiation, slipped in a clause that talked about market economies. So the U.S. is very aware, and I would say even a little bit sensitive to this reality that China has much more ability to control their own economy at the drop of a hat. So tension and further conflict seem to be, and uncertainty seem to be very much the way to characterize it, as you just have. And so I don't expect this to dissipate anytime soon. There is still this September 1st threat, like the sword of Damocles hanging over everyone, that this 10% tariff on the remaining $300 billion may take effect. And what happens in Canada is, of course, of major concern. We seem to be collateral damage. Not to mention our own tensions that we're experiencing with China. We're in a very difficult spot and far more exposed, I would say, given some of the frailties in our own economy, not to mention our energy sector. And so Canada is far more vulnerable in this period. We've seen what's happened in Mexico. Mexico, of course, is sometimes being described as on the verge of a recession. Canada has a lot of exposure as a result of these two heavyweights, to take your analogy, trading blows in the center of the ring. They are going toe-to-toe, and nobody seems prepared to back off. And let's not forget that in the United States, like in Canada, there is an election pending, which also factors into the thinking on whether we're going to be able to stabilize some of these economic uncertainties.
Sometimes it's hard to hear other lawmakers over those very loud Trump tweets.
For sure.
But for the Canadian government, what do you think the approach should be right now? If we are caught in the middle, what do you think the government should be talking about publicly, given this uncertainty?
Well, I think we need to reiterate, as we did during the renegotiations of NAFTA, the importance of our intertwined economies, the importance of the fact that we need to ratify this new trade deal, that Canada, in fact, is a great friend to the United States. We're a market economy. We're able to work with them. We did see, finally, the removal of the tariffs on steel and aluminum, but we haven't been able to get past this particular impasse on getting the trade deal ratified. And so Canada was also called upon, you'll recall, John, by the president to try to urge the Democrats to move ahead. But they're still pointing out problems in terms of labor, in terms of IP protection. They have what they consider to be real issues with the ratification. And so I don't see this moving forward, especially in the midst of the Democratic nomination, which is who can hit the president the hardest. They don't want to give him a win. So again, we are caught in the backdraft of U.S. politics and this enormous trade dispute that's going on between China and the United States. There's not a lot we can do about it. And of course, we are seized with this issue of the Huawei executive and the necessity to go through our judicial process to determine whether an extradition will occur.
Before we had Trump take office, there were efforts being made between our government and the Chinese government to build more bridges, right? That seems to have been off the table because of everything that's been playing out over the last year. But there was obviously a big concern about Trump's rhetoric directed at countries like Canada, Mexico, et cetera, even though we're now near the finish line on USMCA, and that we would need more trading partners abroad. But all of this continuing uncertainty and this realization that the China-U.S. battle is going to go on, likely going to go on past the presidential election and who knows how long. What longer term should Canada be thinking about if we're still looking to grow, we're trying to navigate any of those challenges with the U.S., and we had been looking to markets like China for growth, and now we know that uncertainty is going to be out there for a long time?
I'd say two things, John. I think, number one, we have not even neared reaching the potential of our comprehensive economic trade agreement with the European Union. Now, they're having their own instabilities in their markets. I would suggest as well that we should very aggressively be reaching out to the new administration in the United Kingdom and Boris Johnson and trying to forge a trade deal, a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. I believe that that is possible. It's within our reach. But those are two markets that we could be looking to in terms of the trade diversification, which is always aspirational, but it has potential. And I think within the Asia Pacific as well, with Korea and Japan, they are also a little bit sidelined because of the two heavyweights that are engaged in this trade war. We could be doing a lot more with both of those countries, with Japan and I believe with Korea. And we have a free trade agreement with Korea.
So those are some of the trade options on the table for Canada. As for the markets, I mean, we saw the sell-off yesterday. A lot of it is intangible. It's based on the idea of how far are these two powers willing to go, punching each other back and forth. And you don't know ultimately what's going to happen down the road tied to that. The fact that China has put out to the markets this morning this idea that they are trying to avoid any further weakening, let's say, in the currency for now, which appears to have, U.S. futures are higher after that big sell-off yesterday. For the Chinese government to put that out there, what's your reaction? What does that tell you about the Chinese government?
Well, it tells you that they are a little bit concerned as well. Keep in mind they have 1.4 billion people and a growing middle class. That's clear. I don't see that as a particular entree to countries like Canada to engage in more trade, particularly given our circumstances as you described. However, I think what's going on in Canada is very interesting because we have a sense amongst a lot of Canadians that the cost of living is getting more expensive. Goods and services are more expensive, and yet wages haven't grown. Our housing is still unattainable for a lot of young people. And so there's a nervousness, I think, a general nervousness in the economy. It's reflected in the dollar. It's reflected as well in the fact that we have this pending election and everything is going to ground, that government is sort of not minding the shop.
Yeah.
And we are kind of caught in this stream that is flowing quite rapidly right now, and we could get pulled into it, sucked into that vortex.
And since we are now talking about currency manipulation, you alluded to it. I mean, I think you could go back to the presidential election campaign, that the president was basically dancing around that, and now, here's the opportunity to go full in on using that terminology and making those accusations. What does that mean? Because up until now, it's just been all about tariffs this, tariffs that. Now you've got the U.S. It's going to be talking about currency manipulation. Who knows how long? Whether that starts to slip into the rhetoric from other lawmakers and what do you think happens?
Well, it's not a sophisticated term, but you'll recall this expression, jump the shark. Well, now we have the president calling out China in a way that's never really been done before, certainly not by the head of state, not by the White House. It's difficult to say how the Chinese will react. I think they are fenced in a little bit, as we talked about, because of their own challenges in their own economy. But slapping those kind of tariffs on U.S. goods is also provocative in the sense that how far will Trump go? I think this could ultimately decide the Huawei issue once and for all. I think that is one of the cards that he still holds, banning all Huawei products. He backed off a little bit after the G20, you'll recall.
Yeah.
And there were high hopes that they would perhaps resolve or at least tamp down some of the rhetoric coming out of the G20. That didn't happen. It seems that they both went to their opposite corners, and to take this analogy further, came right back out swinging. And so it is incumbent upon the president to try to, I suspect, pull this back. Whether he's capable of doing it, given his mercurial personality and character, I don't know. But what we do know is that we will get caught in the backdraft or in the ripple effect of what is going on between China and the United States. Let there be no doubt.